Hello there and welcome back to this modern front-end development by example course where today we're going to get started with our 7th section, in which case we're going to be using Bootstrap to actually create a very nice looking restaurant website, so advertising a restaurant essentially. Anyway, without further ado, let's get right into this. Alright, and today we're just going to be going over what is Bootstrap in this first lesson of the restaurant Bootstrap website section. And so yeah, without further ado, let's jump right in. Alright, so Bootstrap is a free front-end framework for faster and easier web development. It includes HTML and CSS-based design templates for typography, forms, buttons, tables, navigation, modals, image carousels, and many other, as well as optional JavaScript plugins. And it also gives you the ability to easily create responsive designs. Now, of course, I understand that doesn't actually give you much. You don't know what, like 90% of what I just said is, but don't worry. Essentially, it's not that difficult. Bootstrap is actually just a collection of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's already been written for us, and that we can then use by simply including it inside our HTML file, and then assigning our elements the correct classes to configure it how we want it to look. Okay, so one of the most important parts of Bootstrap is its grid system. This is what allows for responsive design. Responsive design essentially, it's not what allows for responsive design, it's what really helps with responsive design. One of the main things, essentially. What this allows us to do is to define a set of columns. Makes sense, right? So we have, let's just say that we're creating a news application. So we have all of our different, a page where we can see all of the different, actual articles that have been written. Now, we have an article, so let's say article 1, article 2, article 3. That's great if your display is wide, right? So if we're on a laptop, we can see 1, 2, 3, then the next row of 1, 2, 3, and then the next one of 1, 2, 3. Now, imagine that we have that laptop that's showing that 3x3 grid of articles, right? Now, we transition over to a phone. Our laptop essentially just gets, squashed down into the size of a phone, right? So now, not only is it not wide, not as big, it's also not wide, right? So before we had a wide screen, now it's, it's wide, but it's not wide, it's tall. It's actually quite narrow when compared to its height. So then what we need to do is, instead of showing that 3x3 grid, we condense that down to show a 1x9 grid, essentially. So then we can scroll through our website and then see the rest of the articles. So hopefully that makes at least a little bit of sense. And here I have an example from actually Bootstrap documentation of the grid system. So we have these 3 columns here, and so to create it, we create a container, then we create a row. So div class container, div class row, and then here we have 3 different columns. And here we do call SM, so that essentially just means for the small screen size. And so we can actually change a columns. So the way it works is that we can change a columns essentially how much space it takes up. So for example, we can do something like when we're on a large screen, this column is going to take up like 3 spaces, for example. And in a row, there can be a total of 12 spaces. So essentially, we can say this column takes up 3 spaces, so it's going to allow 4 columns in that row on that screen. But then we can do, if it's a small screen, so call SM, we can say something like 12, so it takes up the entire row. And so if it's a small screen, we will only show that one column in a row, and then stack all the other columns below it. So essentially, that's how that works. Now we are going to see this in action in a second here, so if you don't understand it, don't worry. But that's actually just an introduction to the grid system. Next time we're going to take a look, or in a future lesson, in one of the next lessons, we're going to take a look at it in more depth. But other than that, then that is all for today's lesson, where we just go over the very basics of Bootstrap.